Princess Celestia the Changeling Queen, Chapter 17, Night Talking and Fencing. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Martin Luther King Jr., A Testament of Hope, The Essential Writings and Speeches. Chrysalis certainly didn't hate her sleeping accommodations. In fact, her bed was extraordinarily comfortable. The pillow just gave her the right amount of support, the sheets had a luxurious texture, and the blanket was not too warm but not too cold. But she certainly was suspicious of the alicorn sleeping in the bed to her right, back turned to her. Celestia had been silenced, never intruding into Chrysalis' space. It was Chrysalis' only relief, but then why did she have the feeling that Celestia wasn't giving her space to comfort her? Chrysalis' intuition was quite good. Alternia was terrified that her sister would come out and stab her in the back. It was all she could do to stay still in her bed and turn her back to her sister. Of course she hadn't wanted to do that, but it was to turn her back to Chrysalis or stare at her sister with wide eyes. At the same time, the changeling in disguise berated herself. She knew that her fear and even her anger was irrational. She knew that Chrysalis wouldn't be so stupid to attack her now, and after dinner... well, Alternia couldn't reasonably see her sister as the vengeful queen that she had faced so long ago. In fact, Alternia's personal reflections were forcing her to remember that Chrysalis had never, at least not initially, meant to kill her mother. Grief and rage drove her sister, and admittedly herself, to throw themselves at each other with the intent to kill. It was a sobering thought that cleared Alternia's thoughts of any anger that she long held against her older sibling. It was her fear that was another issue entirely. No matter how Alternia tried, she could not forget that her sister tried to kill her.
Still awake, Celestia?
Quipped Chrysalis.
Yes, although I was about to fall asleep.
The princess's voice was neutral, but the changeling could hear the strain in it. Chrysalis chortled.
I don't think so. Are you scared, princess? I thought you could sense emotion, your highness. Why don't you answer that question yourself?
Said Celestia bluntly. Almost as soon as the words had left her mouth, the alicorn appeared to pull up her blanket as if to shield herself. Her curiosity aroused, Chrysalis extended her senses to Celestia and chuckled. The princess beneath her facade was again engulfed with a melee of emotions, anger and fear being the foremost of them. The anger, though, had lessened greatly from when she had first talked with Celestia, but the fear remained. The changeling almost giggled quietly, until she fell headfirst into the abyss. Confusion was followed by horror and then uncontrollable hysteria as every one of Chrysalis' senses were silently, abruptly severed. For one horrifying moment, Chrysalis saw no light, heard no sound, breathed no more, felt nothing. She was dead. Gasping, Chrysalis withdrew. The changeling sprang up in her bed, backing away from the alicorn. There was fear, and there was Celestia's fear. In her long years as queen, Chrysalis had never felt anything like it.
What, in the name of Tartarus' bowels, was that?
Stammered Chrysalis. The alicorn was silent, enigmatic as ever, but to the changeling's keen eyes, the tightly wound sheets and the depression in her pillows made Celestia look as if she was trying to burrow into her bed. In fact, Celestia looked vulnerable. Something Chrysalis would not normally associate with the princess.
Answer me, Celestia! What could I have done to you to make you so afraid of me?
Alternia had no replies at the changeling's question. What could she say? How could she ever explain to her sister her fear of her? Could Alternia even describe the fear that had haunted her dreams for endless nights, or this terror that held her heart like a cold cradle of knives?
You've impersonated my niece and locked her in the caves to starve, and then did the exact same thing to my beloved protege. You've attacked my beloved ponies and the city they call home. You've played me like a fool and defeated me. What reason could I possibly have to not be afraid of you?
Snorted Alternia, in an attempt to deflect her sister's attention.
You're avoiding the question, Celestia. Answer it!
Demanded the queen. Alternia groaned inwardly. There was just no dissuading her sister. Why did Chrysalis have to be so persistent at times? The masked changeling had been backed into a corner, but she could hardly admit that Chrysalis had tried to kill her. Choosing her words carefully, Alternia slowly began.
I'm afraid that you will stab me in the back and kill me as I sleep. Because...
Alternia winced.
Because what?
Asked Chrysalis, curious.
Because my greatest fear is dying in my sleep.
Spat out Alternia. That night, 1,000 years ago, Alternia had almost slipped into darkness. It was true that the real Celestia had saved her life, but for that brief moment, Alternia had been engulfed in total darkness. At the time, Alternia had simply accepted it. Yet in the nights that followed, the changeling could not forget how completely helpless she had been in the face of death. In that void, there was no clever solution, no escape path, no light at the end of the tunnel. And remembering it terrified the changeling.
Oh, I'm sorry for prying.
apologized Chrysalis awkwardly. Alternia said nothing, but she was sure that her sibling could practically see the waves of indignant anger and shame that flowed off of her concealed carapace. So what her sister had said next completely shocked Alternia.
You know, I'm afraid of dying as well,
said the Changeling Queen. Chrysalis's reluctant admission yanked Alternia from focusing on her own embarrassments and caused the Changeling to frown. This was new to Alternia. She never knew her sister was afraid of death.
You know, a lot of ponies and changelings say that they can see their loved ones as they pass on,
said Chrysalis slowly. Alternia nodded, I guess on her lips, but unwilling to interrupt her sister. There was a pause as Chrysalis, before the Queen, blurted out.
I'm afraid of seeing my mother. Why?
Asked Alternia abruptly, her eyes straight as arrows, ready to catch her sister's answer. For a moment, there was silence as Chrysalis hesitated yet again. When her sister continued, her voice was forlorn, swallowed by the chamber.
I've made a lot of mistakes, Princess. Canterlot was one of them, but that wasn't my biggest one. I'm afraid of what my mother will say to me when I see her.
Alternia frowned and extended her own changeling senses to her sister. As she began to feel the emotions her sister was giving off, she froze. What the Changeling saw confirmed a sneaking suspicion that had been building in Alternia, but she was still unprepared for what she saw. The Changeling in disguise expected sadness and guilt, but not to this extent. Chrysalis's emotions can only be described as an eternal rain of tears. The Changeling's regret splashed against Alternia like a downpour of rain. Each drop a sigh, every sniffle keen wails of anguish, and every sob a moment spent in silent, lonely sorrow. Alternia wasn't sure what exactly were Chrysalis's feelings to her own supposed death, but the events of the evening and her own sister's emotions washed that question away. The Changeling couldn't help but sympathize with her sister's fear. Chrysalis loved their mother dearly, but in a twisted manner. The coup had been Chrysalis's way of providing her love to Camellia. Despite the anger that nagged her, Alternia turned over to face her sister, an understanding yet melancholic smile on her features.
Chrysalis, I think your mother would be proud that you care so much for your daughter in your hive,
spoke Alternia sincerely, though she had to suppress the urge to smirk as she took in Chrysalis's wide-eyed stare.
You really think so?
Asked Chrysalis. Alternia was slightly taken aback by the question, and closed her eyes to buy some more time. It was a question that she hadn't truly considered in a while. She had been so afraid of Chrysalis, so certain that she would have to fight her sister that she needed to avenge her mother. But had the Changeling really asked if her mother would have wanted vengeance? Quietly, Alternia recalled her mother's love for her and her sisters, especially for Chrysalis. After all that Chrysalis did, after she had killed her, would Camellia be angry at her eldest child or not? Would Camellia in any circumstance forgive Chrysalis? An answer lay in Alternia's mind, an answer she found difficult to accept, but one that resonated with her, and built upon everything that she had learned about her sister this evening. The Changeling opened her eyes.
I'm quite sure that she would,
said Alternia, for she knew that Camellia loved all of her daughters. She knew that Camellia would be proud of Chrysalis for her loyalty to her hive and for her care for Lamia. Moreover, Alternia remembered her mother's dying moments all too well. Camellia didn't curse Chrysalis, neither did she order Alternia to avenge her. All she did was smile sadly at both of them. Now seeing Chrysalis as truly sorry for having killed Camellia, Alternia's hate and anger it wasn't gone, but some of it was released. For above all else, Alternia loved her mother, and wanted to respect her mother's will. Chrysalis regarded the alicorn for a moment. The words that Celestia had spoke were strong with conviction, and comforted the Changeling. The Changeling's guilt for the first time in forever was slightly assuaged. To make the alicorn's answer even more sincere was the fact that Celestia's anger had also inexplicably diminished. Not gone, but it had been released, and sympathy had replaced it.
Thank you, Princess Celestia,
said Chrysalis.
Don't mention it. Now I believe we should get some sleep,
said Alternia, smiling. Chrysalis chuckled.
Well, as long as you don't snore.
Celestia giggled, and in that room, for one very moment, the Changeling in disguise and her sister were thankful for each other's company. Which was promptly shattered when the shards of ear-piercing scream tore through the night.
Lamia!
Shrieked Chrysalis. Red lights soared towards her. They were beautiful, like great flying torches that lit up the evening sky. But Lamia screamed. The lights were getting closer, too close. She knew that their beauty was merely a sham, a curse. But she couldn't move, her wings had frozen. She tried to shut her eyes, but couldn't as the red lights exploded in front of her. Unbearable heat tore at her face, ripping her apart. She could feel every searing whip of flame that roasted her carapace. She could hear her eye popping like a squashed bug, and her left leg was a torrent of agony. Bitter bile and vomit choked her throat and burnt her tongue. The pain had consumed every fiber of her body, every sense that she had. A soft lullaby, its words unrecognizable, suddenly cut through her nightmare. The words were unrecognizable, and the melody was alien, but the music soothed Lamia's heart. The pain crushing her body faded away, replaced by the soft, silky texture of blankets. The Changeling sighed.
Get your hooves off my daughter!
Lamia's eyes snapped open quickly enough to see her mother charge at Princess Luna, who was standing at her bedside. Lamia could barely get a word out before the alicorn twisted to meet her mother's charge with her own horn. Even so, Princess Luna was forced several paces back by the enraged Chrysalis.
Chrysalis, please calm thyself. We did nothing to thy daughter but banish her nightmares from her sleep,
said Luna, sweat pouring down from her brow.
You're lying, Nightmare Moon,
roared Chrysalis. The regret that twisted Luna's features made Lamia's heart skip a beat. At the same time, the young changeling recalled the strange voice in her dream. Princess Luna's voice matched that exactly.
Mother, stop! She's telling the truth! She's saying something in my dream that made the nightmare go away.
Chrysalis stopped, stepped back from Luna, and glanced at her daughter.
But that's impossible! You've never had nightmares before!
Lamia swallowed, her nerves getting the better of her.
There's the first time for everything. But this is not the first time, is it?
Asked Luna calmly. As silence settled throughout the room, no pony noticed Princess Celestia arrive at the doorway, accompanied by several guards ponies, all heavily armed and bearing weapons. Seeing that the situation was diffused, Celestia dismissed the ponies with a nod, before trotting into the chamber and closing the double doors. Lamia tried not to avert her gaze from the gaze of her elders, but she couldn't help herself.
Lady Lamia, for how long have you been dreaming of the day that you were crippled?
The alicorn of the night's eyes were kind, sympathetic, and she wore a sad yet understanding smile. Lamia was struck by how dissimilar this pony was to the Nightmare Moon of legend, despite the two being one and the same.
In the month after, it was every week. Then after that, once a week, but now they occur once every month or so,
whispered Lamia. There was a gasp. Lamia turned to glance at Celestia, but the alicorn's face was neutral. Still, the changeling could feel Celestia's pity. Likewise, Luna's emotions were of a similar nature, but hers were more sympathetic than pitying. As for her mother, Lamia saw that Chrysalis was frozen in horror. Her jaw was working up and down, but only feeble croaks came from her mouth. Unable to say anything, the changeling sprang forward and embraced Lamia desperately. Jesus, I feel bad for people who have to go through similar things like that, where they just went through something absolutely horrific and they just have to live with that for the rest of their lives. God bless anyone out there who has to deal with that. Anywho, let's get on to our beautiful donators. Top donators: TacoCat598, Peter Coulthard, J10 Man, Darkside, Gauntlet, and Only One Thing, Zar630, Strix, Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Drake Lovedragon, Pastel Skies, Austin Roland, Crazy Killer 557, Stu Hex, Will, James Burner, Dospo, Delta Omega, Jack Hadge, RuneScyther9852, Leslie Prickett, Hunter Norman, Stephen Bingham, LineGuy12, and many more amazing people. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.